Hello, 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 build stuff. 2025. I'm super excited to be here with you today for this final conversation that is focused on visionary future making. Now, I am looking for my clicker, but that's okay. I want to first start off with talking a little bit about transformation, because many of us know that these are transformative times. And for the past almost 20 years, I have been focused almost obsessively on this word, transformation. How do we move from one state of awareness, one state of being, one state of experience, one state of possibility into the next? And if you're in the world of business, if you're in the world of being alive, if you're in the world of creation, transformation is just part and parcel of what it is that we do and how we navigate the now and the next. The way that I do it is through my company, my consultancy, Burn Bright International, where I focus on working with individuals, with companies, and communities in order to focus on what are the transformational strategies that we need to engage in order to move forward and reach our full potential. But very often, these conversations tend to be in very exclusive conversations. And I am committed to making sure that the conversations that happen exclusively also can happen collectively. And that's why I created World Dream Day. This day focuses on the fact that held within every single dreamer, there is a wealth of potential. And that if we can just activate the dreams, the possibilities that exist within every single one of us, we can actually co-create a brighter future and a better world. So on September 25th, people all over the world activate on this day. Some of them create their own initiatives and their own movements, and some just declare their dream on that day. Because when we express the greater possibilities that exist within us, we then give them a higher possibility of coming into reality. And so I invite every single one of you to, on September 25th, to declare your dream or take action. And if you'd like to become a World Dream Day ambassador, definitely get in touch with me and let me know. So now that I've kind of laid the foundation of the work that I do and the focus on individual and collective transformation, I want to speak to this moment we find ourselves in. That we are essentially a world in transition. How many of you feel this energy of transition, that things are not the same? It is not the same old anymore. And for many of us, it is unsettling. It feels as if we are actually entering into a portal and that we don't know what actually exists on the other side, but we sense that it's going to be completely different than anything we've ever thought of or could even imagine. Now, this word, liminal, has actually increased in our lexicon because of that, the fact that we are in these transitional times. And the word liminal means just that. It is about being in that intermediate state, that phase of not really being in one state or the other. Some might say it's all about the messy middle. And we enter into this emergent ending. And many of us feel that right now, right? The world has changed. Things are no longer what we imagined they would be. And we feel a sense of perhaps even grief at the ending. And we feel unmoored. We feel unstable because we are in that messy middle. But there is a new beginning that will emerge. And in that new beginning, we have to ask ourselves when we gaze upon it, is it actually the world that we want to move towards to? And that's what we're here to discuss today. This concept, this conversation, what I call visionary future making. Many people think of this transition time akin to a rite of passage, that we've moved from one state and now we are transiting into separating and in that in-between, but we haven't yet been able to incorporate what it is we're learning because we're constantly in that state of the next and the next and the next. But the hope, the vision is that at one point, We will stabilize into a foundational state, and this takes time. And it's never a one and done. It happens over and over again. How many of you have heard this term, VUCA, these letters? VUCA. In many worlds, they talk about we live in a VUCA world. And this came around the 1980s, kind of this Cold War terminology, that we live in a world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. But most recently, especially since 2020, this term, these letters, BANI, have begun to emerge more and more. That our world feels brittle. There's a sense of anxiousness. There's a sense of nonlinearity, that things just don't feel like they're actually going in a particular linear direction, and that they're also incomprehensible, that things just don't make sense. How many of you feel that this world just doesn't make sense? If you feel that this world makes no damn sense, raise your hand. Okay. How many of you in the past, I would say, month have asked yourself, what the heck is going on? Or maybe it's what the F is going on, right? I'm getting so many nods. So the question then begins, what helps us in a state where we're going through uncertainty and we're navigating liminality? I believe it's the power of vision. It's the power of being able to attune into a possibility that inspires you and keeps you going and makes you want to get up in the morning, makes you want to connect on a deeper level, makes you want to move forward and advance in the direction of your vision. But how do we actually activate vision? This word vision sometimes feels very airy-fairy, out there, doesn't feel grounded. What I have found over the years in the work that I do is that there are many different ways in which we can activate the power of vision. And I'm going to be sharing them with you today so that you can walk away feeling empowered, feeling informed, feeling inspired to go deeper on your own visions of possibility and actually not just have them be visions, actually have a methodology, a modality, a framework that supports you in activating your vision. Does that sound great to you guys? Right? If it sounds good, say yes. Say yes. All right, now we're getting started. So framework number 1. When I was first beginning on my journey and looking at futures and vision, this framework appeared from this scholar named Hardin Tibbs. And his work is all about focusing on our future as a strategic landscape. That there is your local self, who you are today, with the good, the bad, the ugly, everything you've been through. And as you gaze upon a possibility, there is a chessboard that represents the issues and challenges that you're likely to face. And then there's also this mountain, which represents what you hope to achieve. And then there's this star, the possibility, what you're really aiming for, which represents your enduring and guiding social role. And so this notion of vision and the power of vision is very important. But what becomes more important is the way in which you can actually close the gap between what you imagine and who you are. And the more you can actually create intimacy with your vision of possibility, the greater chances it has to being activated. But most importantly, especially when we talk about collaboration and leadership, it's about how do we take that vision of possibility and begin to share it. Because as you know, nothing can truly get built without that level of collaboration. And so taking a vision and attuning ourselves to a shared vision of possibility is how businesses really go to the next level, is how relationships blossom, being able to connect to a greater vision of possibility and share it so that each of us are touched, moved, and inspired. And this requires us to depart from the same old ways of being and doing and move into embracing new ways. It's also about how do we navigate our day-to-day what we choose to create, and also how we choose to lead. And nowhere is our leadership needed more than when it comes to AI, because it is everywhere. This general purpose technology is everywhere. It is in everything these days. We even learned today that it's in a salt, whatever, pepper shaker plus AI. All these things are being created. And within this domain of organizations, there's many different practices that are beginning to emerge. But there are no best practices yet. Everything is still just in a space of experimentation. And the question then becomes that from the moment we invent a new technology, we also invent new levels of responsibility. And technology without vision, purpose, and a commitment to positive impact could lead us down a perilous path. And we're seeing many AI leaders, right? People who have been in this journey for so many years talking about that. Jeffrey Hinton recently speaking about we have to find a way to get AI to care about us. Because if we don't train that into the models, we're done for. Most recently, Tristan Harris, Center for Humane Technology, in a conversation with Stephen Bartlett of this amazing podcast. How many of you saw this interview? Diary of a CEO. If you haven't, I recommend, it just came out about last week. He's basically speaking about the fact that we are headed for so much transformative change and we're just not ready. Because this is all about the way in which we create a different relationship with technology. And with that, there is this emergent vision. And in a lot of the conversations that I get brought into, it's about how do we actually crack the code on human-centered AI. And this approach that really is all about identifying ways in which we can build in a way that focuses on human needs, values, and well-being into our design, into our development, as well as into our deployment of the systems. It's about how can we be more transparent, how can we be more ethical and collaborative, and how can we empower humans instead of being replaced? And how do we minimize the harms and maximize the ways in which we evolve in harmony, how AI evolves in harmony with our values and aspirations? And this book, this conversation of what could go right with AI, is one that we don't hear very often. This notion of super agency. This book I highly recommend because it focuses on the fact that how could we create a world where even if those who are not directly touching AI can actually benefit from the broader effects of the efficiency of the innovation that emerges as a result of it. And so this is just paving the context of what we're up against and what's informing our current times right now in this moment of transition. And now we're moving into this conversation of how do we actually activate change? I have the fortune of being, I guess you would call it a faculty expert at Singularity University. And when I began, I was invited to one of the executive programs, and I put into Midjourney this prompt: a group of leaders embracing the ability to create change. And this is what emerged. And what I find fascinating about it, I don't know what just happened here. Okay. What I find fascinating about it is that it's a spiral. It isn't an exponential curve. It isn't a linear. It's a spiral, signifying that there's a different model and a different approach, perhaps, to the ways in which we look at transformation. And when I think about how do we activate human potential, it's about the ways in which we look at ourselves in our individual and collective shifts. And how do we then move into a transformative process where we acknowledge that the spaces, the places, the systems, the stories that we tell have to also transform. And as a result, new realities are born. But in the language of the conversation that we find ourselves in, it might make more sense to think about what are our objectives which hold our potential, What are the initiatives that we're going to engage in that can support the activation of this potential? And what are the outcomes that will create that new reality? And this notion of visionary future making is really about how do we begin to envision, how do we begin to embody, how do we begin to enact the shifts that are needed. And it's a path and practice of conscious, intentional, individual and collective transformation that shifts paradigms and builds brighter futures. And so when we talk about brighter futures, we have to realize that it's a dual conversation. It's about how we're showing up in the present moment, as well as how we are leaning into what's emerging. It's about the choices that we're making day to day, moment to moment, in our code, in our collaborations, in our connections, but it's also about the actions that we're taking along the way. And when it comes to futures, and this notion of how do we activate the future, there are multiple ways in which we do that. And I know many of you are taking photos, and I highly recommend this comes from Sohail Inayatullah and Ivana Miljavec. And visionary future making situates itself in the domain of transforming the future. How do we take that vision? How do we backcast? How do we connect on a deeper level and activate possibility? And when it comes to possibilities, we have to acknowledge that there are many different futures. How many of you are aware that at any given moment you could be operating off of a possible future, off of a plausible future that seems like it's likely to happen, off of a probable future, or off of a preferable future? And depending on the future that you choose to focus on, it can limit or expand what becomes possible in how you move forward. So it's important for us to realize that we have to transform our relationship with possibility. And Buckminster Fuller says that you can never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, we have to build a new model that makes the old model obsolete. So what are the new models that are going to support us in activating differently and moving forward more powerfully, in supporting us in activating ways that lead towards more desirable and preferable futures? This model that I call visionary future making is informed by decades of empirical activation on the ground level, as well as working with organizations and leaders to explore how do we not only take visions of possibility, but how do we begin to make them real? And what are the core elements that we need to focus on? And it manifests itself across 4 different key stages. The first one is the desired visions of the future. Every time we have a vision of possibility, we must ask ourselves, who do I need to be? And very often when we talk about the future, we don't actually ask the key questions and connect to a more multi-dimensional relationship with the future. Who do I need to be in order to activate that possibility? What relationships do I need to create in order to make that possible? What will I contribute? And what happens is when we begin to have a more multi-dimensional relationship and ask those key questions and begin to connect in this dynamic way, we enhance our chances of being able to advance more powerfully. Because there's an individual connection and responsibility and accountability. There's an awareness that there's a collaborative and a relational dynamic that's required. And there's also a focus on contribution. How will I make a difference? What will be our contribution as an organization? What will be our contribution as a community? And so when we move from that space of understanding what our desired visions are, the next step is to begin to assess the current paradigm that exists. What is working currently in the ways of our being and our doing, and what isn't working? What is causing us to regress, and what is causing us to powerfully progress? We have to be able to have an honest relationship with the now and realize that there are ways of being and doing that actually support and enhance our ability to activate our desired futures, and there's things we have to contend with And this is all about creating paradigm shifts. And once we get clear on that foundational element, multidimensional relationship with the future, I've become honest with the awareness of what's working, what's not working, and what's actually causing us to regress or to progress, we then have to enter into what I call a transformational commitment. Not just committing to something, but committing to something in a way that it changes everything. One of the most powerful artifacts that I've seen around transformational commitment comes from Octavia Butler. This document was found in her attic, and it reads everything she said she was committed to becoming. She wrote it down, and she began to take action. And even after her passing, much of this actually came to pass. So when it comes to visionary future making, there's some key questions that we begin to ask ourselves. And this unassuming series of lines is actually a transformational strategy in and of itself. What are you committed to transforming? What does that mean in terms of what you're giving up and what you're stepping forward into? Every single one of us have a way in which we can activate that has to be unique to your own desires. And when you become clear on that, everything begins to change because now you have your own approach to taking your shift. And the final stage is all about how do we actually engage new paradigms and create a new future. This is one of my favorite quotes. It says, "How does one become a butterfly?" she asked. "You must want to fly so much that you're willing to give up being a caterpillar. You have to want to transform and shift your current paradigm, our current paradigm, so much that we're willing to let go of business as usual and step into something greater." And when it comes to the key paradigm shifts of our times, this notion of identifying transformative action steps is key. And entering into what I call new paradigm prototyping. How do we begin to truly identify where we want to shift? And I think for our times, there's 3 key shifts that are required. The first one is about how do we transform our mindset? How do we shift and reorient our culture, whether it's our own personal dynamics or the dynamics within our teams and our organizations? And how do we really give ourselves permission to innovate, to do things differently? I consider this to be the 3 invitations of our times. And this first invitation comes into an awareness of realizing that our mindset is not one or the other. It can actually be a continuum. But if we maintain this notion of a fixed mindset, where we believe that our capacities and our personality is fixed and that it won't change, or if we begin to embrace that growth mindset that says that my possibilities are ever expanding. This comes from the work of Dr. Carol Dweck. But in addition to this notion of growth mindset, there's also this notion of what I call the transformation mindset. What does it mean for us to truly believe that we have the power to transform situations, circumstances? That's a mindset that has to be cultivated. That's a mindset that isn't a given. How often do you see something and say, oh, that'll never change? Just be honest, by a show of hands. Have you ever looked at something and just doubted that it could ever be different? But if we hold on to that perspective, then things will continue to stay the way they are. This also has to do with what's known as our mental models. These mental models are these deeply held perspectives, so entrenched that sometimes we're not even aware of how they're shaping our world, how the experiences we've had, the requirements we hold about what needs to be present for us to make a difference, or what needs to be present for us to build our business in a particular way, or to work and advance within an organization. There's all these unspoken, underlying requirements that we have. There's also the knowledge we hold, the heuristics, the best practices, the feelings. And all of that is creating mental models and shaping how we see everything. Not only how we observe, but also how we interact. And if the mental model is holding us in a particular way of being and doing, it's also limiting our possibilities. And so you want to be asking yourself, what mental model do I hold around my visions of possibility? What mental models do I hold around who I desire to become more of? And how can I begin to shift that? When it comes specifically to this AI conversation, there's a current mental model that many people hold, which may not be those of you in this room, but this idea of AI grief. And I invite that even if you may not hold it now, in the future you may, because nothing is certain and nothing is guaranteed. And when the threat of losing your identity, losing your value, losing your ability to contribute is present, there is a sense of loss that people will face and experience. How are we going to deal with that as a collective society? How are we going to deal with that within our organizations, within our communities? This is important for us to begin to think about. And what are the possible mental models and new relationships that can emerge around how we interface with AI? And so the question we have to begin to ask ourselves is, what mindsets and mental models will best benefit me, my desired transformation? And how can I begin to cultivate it? How can I begin to activate that growth mindset, that transformation mindset? The second invitation is culture reorientation. And a lot of times when I'm brought into organizations, this notion of culture is also something that is very reflective of how we operate. There's what we see on the surface within yourself and also the way in which you look at other people, the behaviors and the practices. But underneath, there's so much. Perceptions, attitudes, beliefs, and values. And the more that we hold space for the unknown and the unseen, the more that things become even more of a dynamic quest of exploration within ourselves and with who we're engaging in. The same is true when we look at this dynamic of the cultural web. Within our world, within our organizations, within our communities, there's stories, even within the way that you think about your future. There's stories that you gravitate to. There's symbols that resonate. There's routines and rituals that may serve or may not serve. And there's control systems that maybe need to be broken. There's also structures in how you organize yourself or how you organize within your organization. And then, of course, there's power structures. And when it comes to breaking down and reorienting culture, there's many different ways in which we can look at it. And what I've been able to do in terms of some of the organizational work is to look at how do we create a top-down and a bottom-up approach to culture reorientation. And very often, especially on a community level, there's a leadership level that is engaged. And then there's this idea about who will be nominated to be a part of some of these change processes. And how do we begin to notice what's working, what's not working? And this is particularly one example of a modality that was used within an organization that I consulted with. How do we go from empowering and having it be a top-down approach to something where people feel empowered from the actual different levels of the organization to create change? And how do we come together to ideate about what's possible and make a commitment to implement the shifts that we're seeing, and then reflect together and then educate each other so that we can move forward? When it comes to AI specifically, what we're seeing is that there is a different way in which organizations are being activated. And this comes from Vijaya, who is at Microsoft. And he basically says that we're moving beyond deploying, governing, and building solutions to a world where we empower our employees to define and deploy agentic capabilities that dramatically increase their productivity. And so the question then becomes, if this is Microsoft, which is at the forefront, and these are the shifts that are being made organizationally, what are we going to do with our own relationship? And how do we identify What are the shared purposes, the behavioral norms, the rituals, the artifacts, the ways of being and doing that we can activate in order to shift our own dynamics of our own personal culture, our organizational culture, our community cultures? And the third invitation is that of empowered innovation. And this is so important when we talk about how do we as communities begin to feel that our fingerprints in every project that you're engaging in, how can we support more people in feeling like they're touching and connecting to what matters? Are we just keeping it in one corner of the organization or one corner of the community? Or are we allowing more of a shared collaborative dynamic? This is so crucial as we move forward. And this comes from Upwork. Leaders must move away from the top-down mandates and cultivate a more collaborative, supportive environment that empowers employees to fully harness AI's potential. And so what I'm doing here is I'm kind of parallel pathing what's happening within organizations and then what is the invitation that each of us have. Because one of the things that emerged within the Tristan Harris interview on Diary of a CEO is that when it comes to possible futures, there's two conversations happening right now. The world of the Bezos and Zuckerbergs, et cetera, and then there's everyone else. And those conversations are very rarely the same. But what if we could actually be having more empowered conversations that aren't just about code, but that are truly engaging this notion of future thinking? So in what ways can we inspire and invite and empower and equip ourselves to innovate individually and collectively? These questions that actually reflect the ways in which new paradigms can become new possibilities that create new futures. I invite you to think about for yourself. When it comes to what you care about, what is the mindset that you are cultivating day by day to support you in activating it? How are you activating and reorienting your own, whether it's your individual culture or the culture for the team that you're activating with? How are you beginning to shift the ways in which you show up, not just from a mindset, but from the cultivation of the context that you find yourselves in? And how are you empowering yourself, your teams, your community, your organization to innovate, to do things differently? Not too long ago, I was working with this global organization, and we went through visionary future making, and then we went into this conversation of the three questions and the three shifts, the invitations of our times. And when they came back, I gave them this quote, the same quote I'm going to give to you now, because we're here at Build Stuff. So the question is, how do we go about building differently? And this comes from one of my favorite books, The Little Prince, the writer of The Little Prince. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the people to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. This simple quote is so powerful because it speaks to something that is underlying everything. When it comes to the work that you're doing, the code that you're writing, the ways in which you're leading, you may think it's about just going and doing what needs to be done. But there's an underlying premise that could be informing how you move forward. And it is about yearning for the vast and endless sea. Yearning for something greater. Connecting to a higher possibility. And when I shared this with this organization, they came back and they said, oh, what is our collective yearning? We don't know. What do we as an organization yearn for? That question then poses to you. What is it that you yearn for at this time of transition? And what is our collective yearning? If I were to ask you right now, and just speak it up, what is something you yearn for when it comes to our future? For every person to feel empowered, what's something else that you yearn for? Community, what's something else that we yearn for? Peace, yes. What's something else? Love, what's something else? Communication, bring it in the room. What else do we yearn for? Justice, what else do we yearn for? Over there. What do we yearn for? What's one thing that you yearn for? Freedom, yes. Connection, harmony. So even in this space with people from all over the world, there are these yearnings that connect to something greater. And when we connect to the greater collective yearning, things begin to transform. So I want to talk to you about accessing, because a lot of what I've been sharing is about speaking about the framework, giving examples from our times. But what does it look like when we actually go to the ground and begin to visionary future make? Moving from prototypes, as we know. Very often we're moving in this theoretical approach, right? But what does it look like when we roll up our sleeves and say, let's go? We have to move from the theoretical, from the prototyping, to actually getting dirty with the desired changes we want to make. And I want to share with you my own case study. When I left corporate America and went to a place called Newburgh, New York, which in fact was known as, at that time, as the murder capital of New York. And what was powerful for me in Newburgh is what I saw was this barren landscape. And I thought to myself, what could I contribute? What role could I play? And I ended up working with a local carpenter, paying $200 and putting up a dream wall at the corner intersection so that people every day as they moved about the community could see that dreams live here. So the reason why I start with that is that very often we think that our interventions have to be so complex and so elaborate and requiring so much. Sometimes it's as simple as making the desire for change visible. And then after creating that, I thought to myself, well, why don't I just create a model? So after doing research, we created a model of change about how we can create the community strategy and this, and how are we going to make a difference? And what's fascinating, as many of you probably know, is you can have a model of change, but it is just a model until you begin to connect with others. So that's an image of the mayor of Newburgh, New York. During a community transformation session, collaborating with the mayor, that's also an image of one of the festivals we began to put on. That's an image of some of the community kids, urban planners that came in from Columbia University. And then what ended up happening is this opportunity to work with the governor's initiative on a community cleanup that involved multiple levels of the society. Connecting with people and creating not only trainings, but a cleanup parade where people were coming off from this street to participate in finally cleaning up their community. The question, and that's me over there, the question is, how do we make transformation sexier? How do we get people to want to participate in the vision of possibility that you're holding? And it comes from doing things differently and finding ways to connect in ways that move things forward. And sometimes it comes from creating new systems and structures. We created something known as the Newburgh Dream Center, and it was a center for hope and possibility. And this comes from a write-up that came for Thrive Global about the work that we did in Newburgh. And so this is just an example of the different ways in which interventions were activated in the community. And you'll have your own, whether it's within your organization, within your community, within your small friendship circles, within your online communities. There's going to be a series of activities that support the ways in which you show up. And as you do, there is a promise that this notion of becoming a visionary future maker holds. And it is about how do we begin to be, do, see, sense, and co-create differently. New capacities emerge as a result of us taking action. New capacities emerge when we get up from the bench and we say, yes, I may be a coder in this way, but then in other ways I'm something else. Yes, I may be an organizational CEO in one way, but in other ways I'm something else. And how do we begin to activate the vision of possibility that we hold in as many places as possible? So that it's not this segmented approach to change, but it's the kind of change that creates multiple levels of transformation. Identifying what is our desired vision of the future, assessing the current reality of what's working and what's not working, moving into a transformational commitment that says, I'm not just going to talk about it, I'm truly going to take action and move forward. And what are my transformative action steps that will create that new paradigm and support the activation of the new future? And so that model, that approach, is connected to the ways in which we expand how we hold and activate possibility, and how we make a difference, and how do we build our capacity. The ways in which we be. How do you show up in your moment-to-moment inner self? The ways in which you do. The work that you do, it can be done from multiple ways, but how do you approach that work? It reminds me of that story of somebody watching someone building and them saying, oh, what are you building? And someone could say, okay, I'm just building, this building. Someone could say, I'm building a cathedral to honor the god, the goddess. What are you coding for? What are you creating for? Why do you do what you do? What is the deeper meaning behind it? And how can you be that person, whether it's in your meetings, that asks the questions that helps to create brighter futures? How do you begin to shift the way in which you see reality and develop your intuition, what you're sensing, and how you're approaching collaboration and co-creation? And so this notion of the future, what I've presented to you today, multiple ways of approaching and connecting to the future, and realizing that our collective future is inviting us to transform now more than ever, to move beyond this notion of dystopia, which feels almost like a given, and even to move beyond Kevin Kelly's notion of protopia, which presupposes that we just get on a path and we just do a little better, we don't know where we're going. I posit and I invite us to begin to engage in what I call syntopia. Ways in which we can collaborate and consider all of life, all stakeholders in how we engage and how we co-create. The human, the beyond human, and of course now, this artificial intelligence. How are we going to create a new world of possibility? How are we going to create new futures that are founded on different perspectives of syntopia? Ilya Prigogine has this amazing quote that I love, one that I find so inspiring, which is that we are living in a dangerous and uncertain world that inspires no blind confidence. Our hope arises from the knowledge that even the smallest fluctuations may grow and change the overall structure. And as a result, individual activity is not doomed to insignificance. The way you show up within yourself, within your organizations, how you create, how you co-create, all of it matters. Because all of it is impacting more than you will ever know. And if you begin to embrace that awareness of realizing that how I show up is actually contributing to a larger field of awareness and possibility. It might inspire you to wake up each day and to show up in ways that support that desired future that you're holding. Because each and every single one of us have the potential to create ripples of transformation, not just individually, but also collectively. It reminds me of this, not too long after this framework was developed. It was actually created for a conference in Brazil. I ended up in California, in Oakland, and I found this beautiful sculpture garden, Kaiser Permanente Park. And what I found really interesting, is that there were these very well-known figures, and then there were these books that had no names on them. And I thought to myself, that's you and I. That's the books that we, through our actions, through the choices we make, that we can actually co-create new futures. And maybe not millions of people will ever read the book that you write, but it still goes into the archives. And so question is, what book will you write through your actions, through your perspective? How will you co-create brighter futures and brighter possibilities? And so what I want to invite us to do in this last moment is just to have a vision of possibility. Just to close your eyes for one moment as you sit here with me. And just get a sense, even if it's a word or a sentence, of the quality of the future that you yearn for. The kind of world that you desire. How you want to show up after you leave, build stuff. And the difference you want to make, whether it's in your professional world or your personal world. And just connect to that vision of possibility and hold it near and dear, because it is that vision that's going to guide you as you move forward. And so, you're welcome to open your eyes and to see that the door is open now for us to go forward and to be even more powerful as we become bolder with the possibilities that we care about. We become braver than we may have ever known. And most importantly, we become committed to finding the others, to finding other people that share that yearning, that share that vision of possibility, and to use that power of vision to build brighter futures. Because our world needs your visionary future making now more than ever.